If anyone had told me 5 years ago that I'd meet the love of my life in the produce aisle of a grocery store, I would have laughed and kept walking. But that's exactly how it happened. A stranger with kind eyes and a crooked smile bumped into me while reaching for the same bag of oranges. And in that unremarkable moment, something shifted. His name was Ethan Carter. He was 34, charming in a way that felt both effortless and intentional. And from the very beginning, he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. I was 31 then, a woman who had built her own life piece by piece, a small marketing agency that paid the bills, a circle of friends who felt like family, and a heart that had almost given up on love. But Ethan slipped into my world as if he had always belonged there. He remembered the tiniest details: how I took my coffee, the name of the stray cat that used to visit my porch, and he spoke about the future like he could already see us in it. Dinners turned into weekends away, weekends into shared keys and toothbrushes, and before I could process how fast everything was moving, I was standing under a string of fairy lights as he got down on one knee. "I will cherish you every day of my life," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I will build a future where you never have to doubt how much you're loved." And I believed him. Of course I did. Every part of me, the cautious, rational parts included, believed that I had finally found the one person who would protect my heart rather than break it. Our wedding was a dream, an intimate ceremony under the oak trees behind my grandmother's old house, with just our closest people present. As we danced under the soft glow of lanterns, his hand pressed gently against the small of my back, I felt the kind of peace I had only ever read about. I thought the story was simple. Two people who loved each other deeply, ready to build a life together. And for a while, that's exactly what it seemed to be. After the honeymoon, we moved into the house I had inherited from my grandmother, a 2-story brick home, with ivy climbing its walls and a history carved into every floorboard. It wasn't just a house. It was a legacy, one I had dreamed of raising a family in. Ethan loved it instantly. "It feels like a storybook," he said the first morning we woke up there, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor as he brewed coffee in the kitchen. I ran a small but growing agency from the converted study, and Ethan, with his job in finance, often worked late into the night beside me. Our days settled into a comforting rhythm. We painted rooms together, planned garden renovations, and laughed over burnt dinners that somehow always tasted better when shared. Money was never a point of tension. Ethan insisted he didn't care about what I had before we met: the house, the savings, the business I'd spent nearly a decade building. "All I want is you," he'd whisper when I worried about the imbalance. "We're partners. Everything else is just noise." I believed him because there was no reason not to. He never flinched when I paid for repairs or when my name alone appeared on property documents. He brushed it off as practicality, saying it made sense since the inheritance was mine before we married. And yet, every time he said, "What's mine is yours," I felt a warm swell of gratitude. The house became more than walls and windows. It was the foundation of our shared life, a symbol of our trust. At night, we'd sit on the porch with glasses of wine, planning futures filled with children's laughter and long summer vacations. I remember thinking that happiness didn't have to be complicated, that love, when it was real, was built on shared dreams and unwavering faith in one another. And for a while, that was enough. I never questioned his motives. I never wondered what shadows might be hiding beneath those gentle smiles. If anything, I thought I was the lucky one. But even the strongest foundations can hide cracks, and ours, though I didn't know it yet, had already begun to form. It started with little things that didn't look like red flags at first. They looked like care. Ethan began leaving articles open on my laptop about smart couples and how they merge accounts to build unity. Over dinner, he'd float the idea gently, like a feather he pretended not to watch fall. "It's not about control, Clara," he'd say, twirling his fork, eyes soft. "It's about being a team. One budget, one vision, no secrets." I'd nod, even when something inside me tensed, because he said it with such conviction that doubting him felt petty. When I told him I'd think about it, he brought up the house always as a legal technicality. "If anything ever happened to you, probate could be a nightmare. Add me to the deed and we avoid all that." I'm not asking for ownership, just protection. He used words like safety and responsibility and future, and I hated that they made sense. On a Saturday morning, I mentioned it to Mia while we walked around the farmer's market. Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just take your time," she said. "And don't let anyone make you feel guilty for asking questions." Later, when I repeated her advice, Ethan let out a breathy laugh. "Mia loves you, but she's always been suspicious of men. You know that. She's projecting." He said it kindly, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis he didn't want to be right. I told myself he was just trying to shield us from outside noise. The next week, he started using the word we more than usual. Our house, our future, our accounts. He offered to pick up the property tax paperwork to save me a trip. And when I hesitated, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'm only trying to help." The guilt pressed heavier on me than any documents ever could. I remembered the promises under the oak trees and how safe I'd felt with his hand at the small of my back. Safety is a funny thing. Sometimes it looks exactly like a door being closed behind you. I told myself I was overthinking. That love meant compromise, and compromise meant trust. I convinced myself control was just another word for care when spoken in a gentle enough voice. Ethan's interest in my business arrived like a favor I hadn't asked for. He started small, leaning over my shoulder while I reconciled invoices. "You're underbilling this client," he murmured, pointing at a line item with a frown that looked like concern. "Let me help you restructure packages. You're leaving money on the table." It felt flattering at first, the man I loved treating my work like something valuable, something worth optimizing. He set up color-coded spreadsheets, created forecasts, and asked for admin access to my accounting software so I can fix that wonky import you hate. My gratitude became a habit. He printed out contracts and placed sticky notes where I needed to sign, always when I was busiest. "It's standard," he'd say, tapping the page. "Liability language. I strengthened your protections." I skimmed, trusted, signed. When I admitted how overwhelmed I was juggling clients and ops, he smiled. "Then let me be your operations guy. I'll deal with banks, vendors, the boring stuff. You stay brilliant." Brilliant was a word he used like a key, and I let it unlock every door. The day power of attorney came up, he wrapped it in pure logic. We were drinking tea on the porch when he mentioned the story of a colleague whose wife had landed in a hospital. No access to her accounts, payroll frozen, vendors furious. "We would never want that," he said, voice low, protective. "Just an emergency measure. Limited scope. Only if you're incapacitated." He already had the form, neatly tabbed, and a notary he trusted on speed dial. I felt childish for hesitating. "I trust you," I told him, hating how small my voice sounded. He squeezed my hand. "That's all I've ever wanted." After that, he started answering emails in my name with uncanny ease. Clients complimented the newfound efficiency. Vendors stopped calling me, they called him. He moved my business banking to a more favorable institution and forwarded the login details in an email I somehow never received. When Mia asked how things were going, I told her I finally felt supported. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "Support shouldn't make you feel replaceable." I laughed it off, blamed stress, and returned to the porch where Ethan had already arranged another neat stack of papers under a paperweight shaped like a lighthouse. Funny how you can mistake a warning beacon for a promise of safe harbor when you want the sea to be calm. The first time I woke up to the sound of Ethan's voice, it was 2:13 a.m. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that hums in your ears, except for a low, steady murmur seeping out from under the office door. At first, I thought he was watching a late-night movie or listening to a podcast, but as I swung my legs out of bed and padded barefoot down the hallway, the tone sharpened into words I wasn't meant to hear. "Yes, the transfer needs to happen before the quarter closes." "No, she has no idea." My breath caught mid-step. There was a clipped coldness to his voice, stripped of the warmth I knew so well. I edged closer, pressing my ear against the wood, heart pounding in sync with every syllable. "Assets. Liquidate. Signature. She'll sign it." My name never left his lips, but it didn't have to. He was talking about me, or at least, about something that belonged to me. I stood there for a full minute, the weight of that realization growing heavier with every heartbeat, until the creak of his chair made me retreat to the bedroom like a thief. When he slipped back into bed 20 minutes later, his breathing was steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. The next morning, over breakfast, I forced my voice to sound casual. "Who were you talking to last night?" I asked, stirring my coffee too long, too fast. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "Work call," he said, with a shrug that felt rehearsed. "One of our overseas clients had a question about portfolio movement. Sorry if I woke you." The lie was so smooth it almost sounded plausible. "Portfolio movement," I repeated, trying not to let the unfamiliar term taste bitter on my tongue. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, smiling like the man I married. "I keep telling you, you worry too much. Go back to trusting me, okay?" I nodded and let the subject drop. But that night, when he kissed me goodnight and rolled over to sleep, I stared at the ceiling long after his breaths turned slow and even. I had trusted him with my heart, my home, my business. But for the first time, I wondered if I had also trusted him with a weapon that could destroy me. Once you notice one crack, it's impossible not to see them all. A week after the midnight call, an envelope arrived addressed to Ethan. The return label was a bank I didn't recognize. I placed it on his desk, assuming it was work-related, but the next day it was gone without a word. Then another came, this one marked, "Investment Portfolio Statement." I asked about it casually, pretending curiosity rather than suspicion. "Oh, just a client thing," he said, his tone clipped, already changing the subject. My stomach knotted. Ethan had never hidden mail from me before. Soon there were more signs. A second phone he claimed was for work, a new habit of locking his office door even when he was inside, and trips that popped up suddenly without explanation. "Just meetings," he'd say, kissing my forehead as he wheeled a suitcase toward the door. Back in a couple of days. But when he returned, he was distant, distracted, and smelled faintly of hotel soap and unfamiliar cologne. I told myself I was imagining it, but my instincts wouldn't quiet. The unease followed me like a shadow, growing heavier each day. One evening, he brought up the land I'd inherited from my grandfather, a quiet patch of property on the outskirts of town I'd never considered selling. "It's just sitting there," he said, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. "We could reinvest the money, maybe expand your business, or put it toward a rental property." I hesitated, but he pressed on, his tone honeyed. "You're always talking about making smart choices. This is one. Besides, it would make things simpler for us." Simpler. That word echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. Simpler for whom? At night, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, replaying every odd detail, the secretive phone calls, the locked office, the mail I never saw twice. The man who once told me he wanted nothing from me but love now seemed obsessed with everything I owned. And though he still kissed me goodbye every morning and called me sweetheart over dinner, the tenderness felt hollow. Something was shifting beneath the surface, and I couldn't yet see its shape. But I knew with a certainty that made my chest tighten that it was coming for me. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind where rain streaked the windows, and the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Ethan was in Chicago for a client summit, or so he claimed. I was trying to distract myself with emails when my laptop pinged a shared calendar notification from our joint cloud account. Odd. He rarely used it. Curiosity overrode hesitation, and I opened the folder. That's when I saw it. A string of emails between Ethan and someone named Jeffrey L. Morton, Esquire. My stomach twisted. I shouldn't read them, I told myself. But my fingers disobeyed. The first line made the blood drain from my face. As discussed, the preliminary divorce agreement is attached. Divorce. My hands went cold. I clicked the attachment, and the words on the screen blurred and sharpened like a cruel optical illusion. He was requesting 50% of the house, despite the deed being solely in my name. 49% of my company shares the business I built from scratch. 70% of our combined savings. And tucked at the end, like an afterthought, a clause about spousal support for an adjustment period. My breath hitched. Every sentence was an attack disguised as legalese. I scrolled further, and my heart hammered harder. "We will frame the narrative carefully," Jeffrey wrote. "Emphasizing Clara's instability and emotional volatility will support claims of marital misconduct." Instability, volatility. Words meant to strip me of credibility. There were other messages too, drafts of statements, financial summaries, even a proposed timeline. The most recent email was dated yesterday. Ethan hadn't been in Chicago for work. He'd been finalizing plans to dismantle my life. I stared at the screen until the words lost their meaning. The man who once kissed my forehead and promised to protect me was building a case to destroy me. My hands trembled so violently that I dropped the mouse, and the clatter against the hardwood floor made me flinch. I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to call him and demand answers, but instead I closed the screen and sat in the suffocating quiet, my pulse roaring in my ears. For the first time, love felt like a weapon, and I was on the wrong end of it. 2 nights later, I followed him. I told myself it was reckless, paranoid even, but I couldn't stop. Ethan said he had a late dinner with a client downtown. Instead, he parked 3 blocks from a law office and disappeared inside a narrow brick building with no signage. I waited in the car for nearly an hour before curiosity dragged me closer. Through a small side window on the 2nd floor, faint voices bled into the night. I crept up the stairwell, stopping just shy of the landing, my back pressed against the cool plaster. "The abuse angle is key," a male voice said. "Sympathy is half the battle." My pulse spiked. Then Ethan's voice, calm, deliberate, chillingly familiar. "I can say she threw things," shouted at me. "We'll get a few witnesses, maybe her friend Mia if we handle it right. The goal is to make her look unstable." My breath hitched. He paused, and I heard papers rustle. "Once the joint ownership claim goes through, she can't contest the assets. The house, the savings, the company, all of it gets split." Another voice, his brother's, smug and certain. "She won't see it coming. And if she does, she's too soft to fight back." They laughed. My vision blurred. The floor beneath me felt unsteady, as if the whole world had tilted. I clutched the stair rail to stay upright, bile rising in my throat. I'd spent years building a life with this man, defending him when others questioned his motives, believing his promises. And here he was, plotting not just to leave me, but to erase me. My heart broke in slow motion, not from betrayal alone, but from the realization that everything, every kiss, every whispered "I love you" had been part of a strategy. I stumbled back down the stairs before they could see me, my breaths coming too fast, too shallow. Outside, the night was cold, but I didn't feel it. I sat in my car with trembling hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the man I thought I knew through a blur of tears. Ethan wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to ruin me. And the woman I was before that moment, trusting, hopeful, blind, ceased to exist. I don't remember driving home that night. One moment I was parked across from the office, watching Ethan emerge under the yellow streetlight as if nothing in the world was wrong. And the next, I was sitting on the living room floor, still in my coat, staring at the darkened fireplace. Hours passed, but time didn't feel real. Grief doesn't arrive with screaming or dramatic collapses. It seeps in quietly, filling every corner of your chest until breathing becomes work. I replayed his words over and over, like a cruel echo. Abuse angle, joint ownership, too soft to fight back. Too soft. Maybe I was. I thought about the nights he traced promises across my skin, the mornings he whispered plans for our future, the countless moments I had dismissed my instincts because I was too in love with the man I thought he was. The pattern was all there, the pressuring, the secrecy, the gaslighting, and I had brushed it aside, chalking it up to stress or my own paranoia. Now, every memory felt like a taunt. The way he'd laughed when I asked about the mail, the sudden trips, the documents I'd signed without reading. They were puzzle pieces I'd refused to put together. I curled into myself on the floor, shaking with humiliation so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I wanted to confront him. God, I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in his face, to watch his lies collapse under the weight of my fury. But anger, I realized, wouldn't save me. If I exploded too soon, he'd twist the narrative just as he planned: the unstable wife, the volatile partner, and then he'd win. So I stayed silent. I wiped my tears, pulled out a notebook, and began writing everything I remembered: dates, conversations, documents, every strange detail I had ignored. It felt pitifully small, like trying to catch a hurricane in a teacup, but it was a start. If he was going to burn my life down, I needed to make sure he didn't walk away from the ashes unscathed. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt something other than grief: resolve. The next morning, I called Mia. I didn't even get the words out before she was at my door, hair tied back, laptop under her arm, eyes sharp with the kind of anger only a best friend can feel. I told her everything: the emails, the meeting, the plan, and watched her jaw tighten with every detail. "We're not going to let him get away with this," she said, her voice steady. "But you have to be smart. No accusations, no confrontations. We build a case." Together, we contacted a family law attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Elena, who listened without flinching. "The key is documentation," she said. "If he's planning fraud, we need to prove it before he strikes." So I became a detective in my own home. I installed a small recording app on my phone and left it running whenever Ethan called someone from his office. I photographed every document I could find: tax returns, bank statements, business contracts, and stored them on an encrypted drive. Mia helped me comb through months of emails and flagged anything suspicious. What we uncovered was worse than I imagined. Ethan had already opened several accounts under both our names, funneling money from my business into them. He'd transferred funds to a shell company I'd never heard of. Most chilling of all, tucked in a scanned PDF of a loan agreement, was my signature dated 3 weeks earlier. Except I had never seen that document before. My heart pounded as I stared at the looping letters of my name, forged with uncanny precision. Elena confirmed what I already suspected. If he presented this in court, it could be used to claim I had consented to certain financial decisions. "We'll need forensic verification," she said, "and we'll need to act quickly." The betrayal that had once felt personal now had legal teeth. Ethan wasn't just trying to leave me. He was constructing a trap so airtight I'd lose everything without ever stepping into a courtroom. But now, he wasn't the only one playing a long game. With every piece of evidence I gathered, I felt the humiliation shrink and something sharper take its place. I had spent months underestimating the enemy sleeping beside me. I wouldn't make that mistake again. It was a Tuesday when Elena called me into her office with that expression, the one that made my stomach twist before she even spoke. "Clara," she began gently, "we found something." She turned her screen toward me, and the words there made my vision blur. Ethan had taken out a home equity loan against my property, the house my grandmother left me, the one in my name without my knowledge or consent. The loan documents were signed with my name, forged once again, and already approved by the bank. He had essentially mortgaged a part of my home, turning my inheritance into collateral for something I had never agreed to. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself as nausea rolled through me. "It gets worse," Elena continued, sliding another file across the desk. There it was in black and white, a joint account I'd never seen before, opened 6 months earlier. Ethan was the primary holder. The secondary? A woman named Lila Moore. Transfers from that account showed thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, funneled from my business accounts and the home equity loan straight into their shared balance. Jewelry stores, luxury hotels, real estate deposits. Lila Moore. The name pulsed in my head until it felt carved into my bones. My husband, the man who had sworn to protect me, to build a life with me, hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had financed their future with the pieces of mine. I stared at the evidence, numb. This wasn't about broken vows or whispered lies anymore. It wasn't even about love. This was war, and I was losing. "We can pursue criminal charges for forgery and fraud," Elena said carefully, "but we'll need irrefutable evidence and a strategic approach." Her words barely registered. All I could think of was Ethan's smile across the dinner table, the way he had kissed my forehead, and told me not to worry, all while dismantling my life behind my back. Rage burned where heartbreak had lived. I had thought I was gathering evidence to defend myself. Now I understood I was preparing for battle. Ethan had crossed a line, and I was done playing defense. From that moment on, I became an actress. Every morning, I kissed Ethan goodbye like nothing had changed. I asked about his business trips and nodded through his vague explanations. I laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, and kept the mask firmly in place. Inside, I was rewriting the script. The first move was to secure what was left. With Elena's help, I created new accounts under a trust in my name only and transferred my remaining business revenue and personal savings before he could touch them. I froze joint accounts, citing suspicious activity. I notified the bank of potential fraud on the home equity loan and began the legal process to challenge its validity. Every action was deliberate, quiet, invisible. Ethan noticed none of it. If anything, he seemed more relaxed, almost smug. He had no idea the walls were closing in. Then came the paperwork. Elena filed a motion to protect my business assets and a petition to challenge property ownership claims. Each document was a small, silent blow, one he wouldn't feel until it was too late. I started keeping my phone recording whenever he spoke about finances, and more often than not, his arrogance did the work for me. "Once we sell that land," he told a friend on speakerphone one evening, "we'll be set. She won't fight me on it." I smiled from the kitchen doorway, pretending not to hear. And then, for the finishing touch, I planned the perfect illusion: a celebration dinner. I told him my company had landed a major client, that I wanted to toast to our future together. He was thrilled, even suggested we open a joint investment account to maximize our returns. I agreed with a practiced smile, promising to think about it. As I set the table that night, lighting candles and uncorking wine, I caught my reflection in the glass, calm, collected, almost unrecognizable. I wasn't the broken woman curled up on the floor weeks ago. I was a strategist. Ethan sat across from me, oblivious, raising a toast to a future he believed he had already stolen. And as I clinked my glass against his, I silently promised myself the next move would end this. Once and for all. It was astonishing how easy it was for Ethan to believe his own lies. By then, weeks had passed since I discovered the forged loan documents and the joint account with his lover. Yet he moved through the house with the confidence of a man convinced he was untouchable. That night, he poured himself a drink and locked himself in the office, phone pressed to his ear. I had learned to listen without guilt after all. This was survival. I placed my phone against the door, the recording app already running. "She has no clue." Ethan's voice floated through the wood, smug and self-satisfied. "I've got everything lined up. Once the divorce papers are filed, she'll have nothing. Not the house, not the business, nothing." My pulse drummed steadily, not with fear anymore, but with cold, sharpened focus. "Are you sure she'll sign?" his brother's voice asked, half laughing. "Oh, she'll have no choice," Ethan replied. "The settlement makes it clear. She's unstable, irresponsible with money. Once we present the forged consent forms and the business restructuring documents, the court will side with me. She'll cave." There was a pause, and then a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Lila and I have already started looking at condos. Once this is over, we'll sell the house and split the profits. I'm thinking of using the money to start that investment firm I told you about." "Man, you're ruthless," his brother said. "You really planned this from day one?" "Of course I did," Ethan replied easily. "You don't marry someone like Clara without thinking about the end game. She's useful, well, was useful. Now, she's just a stepping stone." My hand shook, but I held the phone steady, capturing every poisonous word. A strange calm washed over me, one I hadn't felt since the night I first overheard him on the phone. The man in that room wasn't my husband, he was a stranger wearing his face, a predator who had mistaken me for prey. But he had underestimated me. And in less than 24 hours, the hunter would become the hunted. The morning of the reckoning dawned bright and cold, the kind of morning that felt too beautiful for what was about to happen. By 9 a.m., every piece was in motion. Elena had filed the divorce petition before sunrise, supported by hundreds of pages of evidence. The forged signatures, the fraudulent loan documents, bank statements proving embezzlement, and recordings of Ethan's conversations, including the one from last night. We had submitted proof of his infidelity and documentation of the money funneled into the account with Lila. By 10 a.m., the court had issued an emergency order freezing all joint assets and placing an immediate hold on the house's title. Ethan wouldn't see a cent of it. At 11 a.m., I closed the final account he had access to. His card stopped working within the hour. By noon, the storm hit. Ethan came home in a rage, waving a thick envelope. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, slamming the divorce papers onto the kitchen table. "You filed against me? You think you can win?" I met his fury with silence, a calm he couldn't understand. "You forged my signature," I said evenly. "You mortgaged my house without consent. You stole from my business. And you cheated on me. This isn't a divorce, Ethan. It's a reckoning." For the first time, his confidence faltered. "You can't prove any of that," he spat. "Actually," I said softly, sliding my phone across the table, "I can." I pressed play. His own voice filled the room, cold and calculating, bragging about how I'd end up with nothing. His face drained of color. Before he could speak, the doorbell rang. 2 detectives stood on the porch, badges glinting in the sunlight. "Ethan Carter?" one asked. "We have some questions about a series of forged documents and fraudulent transactions." He turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did this to me," he hissed. "No," I replied, standing taller than I ever had before. "You did this to yourself." They let him out as he sputtered excuses, his arrogance crumbling with every step. When the door shut behind them, the house was silent again, but this time it was a silence filled not with grief, but with liberation. The storm had finally broken, and I was still standing. 6 months later, the courtroom was almost empty when the judge stamped the final decree and slid the papers across the bench. It was over. The marriage that had once felt like a fairy tale had been dismantled piece by piece, not by hatred, but by truth. Ethan signed the settlement with shaking hands, his once slick confidence replaced by hollow silence. He walked out of that courthouse with nothing. No house, no share of my company, no claim to my savings. The joint account he'd opened with Lila was seized as evidence. The home equity loan was voided. The forged documents handed over to investigators. And the man who once boasted about leaving me with nothing now faced criminal charges for fraud and forgery, his reputation in ruins. I should have felt triumphant watching him go, but what I felt instead was lighter, as if I had been holding my breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. The months leading up to that moment had been brutal. There were nights when I woke up drenched in sweat, replaying every mistake I'd made, every warning sign I'd ignored. There were days when the weight of the legal battle threatened to crush me. But through it all, I had rebuilt myself from the inside out. I sold the house I once shared with Ethan, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It deserved to be more than a monument to betrayal. With the proceeds, I bought a smaller place with wide windows and a little garden, a home that felt entirely mine. I expanded my business, hired a team, and learned to read every line of every contract before signing. And for the first time in my adult life, I took a trip alone 2 weeks in Italy, wandering cobblestone streets with no one to answer to but myself. People still ask me if I regret marrying Ethan, and for a long time I didn't know how to answer. But now, I think I do not. Because without that betrayal, I might never have learned the strength buried beneath my softness. I might never have known that I could survive losing everything and still stand taller on the other side. Love, I've learned, isn't about blind trust. It's about knowing you can trust yourself to rise again when trust is broken. And as I locked the door to my new home that evening, I whispered a quiet promise into the dusk, not to Ethan, not to anyone else, but to myself. I would never let anyone take my power again. This chapter of my life was mine alone. And for the first time, that was enough. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.